Welcome to First. I'm Mark Eichman along with Michelle Polston and Shirley Min. It's no secret that the life of bees is connected to our environment. In Delaware, there's a top bee person. We meet her this week on First.
As the deadline for a state budget draws closer, the call for full funding for education here in Delaware grows louder. Will schools have to make do with less?
Sometimes the simple stories about life are the most fascinating. It's a lesson learned by students from Servium Academy. What they share in the classroom and with you is both entertaining and educational. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
Welcome to summer. For most people, it's a time to enjoy all that nature has to offer. And a big part of that is the relationship between bees and nature. And while the plight of the world's bees has been well documented in recent years, there are new concerns. In January, the Rusty-Patched Bumblebee was added to the endangered species list. But Delaware is taking steps to track such things. In this week's First Look, we visit some Delaware beehives and meet the state's new leader charged with keeping track of the bee population. In a quiet corner of Newark, Ray Walker tends to his bees. He monitors the bees, checking the temperature in their hive, watching for queen bees to produce more bees, and keeping an eye out for disease or parasites. Walker uses natural, traditional beekeeping methods to manage his collection of hives, called an apiary. He even uses native Delaware plants, including dried hop cones, to produce smoke to calm the bees down.
And I also use staghorn and sumac blooms. These are old-timey beekeeping practices that have kind of been lost over time.
The bees use chemical signals to communicate, and the smoke interrupts those signals. It's a process that Walker, a former chemical engineer at DuPont, can relate to.
That's one of the things that fascinates me, is these naturally occurring compounds that biologically signal different messages to the bee colony. We need more pollen. We need more nectar. I think there's roughly 30 different messages that they use, so they have a very social structure.
Walker is one of more than 200 registered beekeepers in Delaware, and making sure all those hives are registered is part of Megan McConnell's job. She recently took on the role of state apiarist.
The main goal of the state apiarist is kind of to work with the beekeepers throughout the state and make sure that we aren't getting any kind of new diseases that could come into our state.
She gave us a look inside a pair of beehives recently set up at the Department of Agriculture headquarters in Dover.
So the colony on the left is a nucleus colony that we bought about a month ago. And then the colony on the right is a swarm that we caught on the Delaware Memorial Bridge.
In addition to educating beekeepers and the public, McConnell also monitors bees being brought into Delaware to help farmers with pollinating their plants.
We get a lot of bees that come from out of state, from Florida, Maryland, New Jersey, and West Virginia to pollinate our watermelons and cucurbids, pumpkins, pickles, things like that. We probably have about 3,000 colonies that come in or out of our state or that permanently stay in the state of Delaware.
She's on the lookout for threats to the bee population, and there's no shortage of hazards, especially because so much bee habitat in Delaware has been paved over and urbanized.
We have a lot of things we have to worry about. We have pesticides, applying too much pesticides. We also have to worry about a lot of different diseases and parasites that are in the honeybee colonies. So we have a varroa mite. It's kind of like a little tick. It's the same size on a bee as it would be for a dinner plate on us, and it's sucking its blood and transferring different types of viruses.
Last winter, about 43% of Delaware's bee colonies died, a higher than normal total according to the National Bee Informed Partnership.
Yeah, we lose a lot of colonies in the winter from viruses and infections, bacteria and fungal infections. And that's part of beekeeping, is recognizing diseases, and that's where the state apiarist, Megan, helps beekeepers identify different kinds of infections.
To help improve the chances of survival for Delaware bees, McConnell suggests planting bee-friendly plants or vegetables around your home.
Any vegetables, squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, they're going to come visit, watermelons. So if you wanted to benefit also from those plants, that would be one way of doing it.
Some Delaware chicken farmers are taking steps to help out too.
That is a goal with Delaware, that we are trying to get them to plant more pollinator-friendly buffers throughout their chicken areas.
With the help of the Delmarva Poultry Industry Group, chicken farmers are planting these buffers, which attract bees, but the plant roots also trap nutrients, which in turn helps improve water quality. Every little step helps, and for keepers like Ray Walker, it's a fulfilling hobby.
You have to be dedicated to keeping your bees healthy and providing them the nutrition and monitoring diseases and mites, and it's a lot of physical work, so that discourages a lot of people that work full-time. There aren't that many hours in the day, but fortunately for us retired guys, it's a perfect fit.
Megan McConnell says bees are responsible for pollinating 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat, which of course means their health and well-being is really important to ours. The honeybees we saw in Dover are European honeybees, which are traditionally used to pollinate crops in Delaware. Of course, it's big business for beekeepers to supply bees to help pollinate crops here, and Delaware bees go elsewhere, something most people often don't think about. But you may remember a truck carrying bees overturned on an I-95 on-ramp near Newark back in 2014 that spilled as many as 20 million bees that were on a truck headed from Florida to Maine. So it just shows really how in demand bees are.
I remember that, Mark. So tell us, how are Delaware's bees holding up compared to other parts of the country?
It's basically about the same here in Delaware as it is in the rest of the country. Bees here and elsewhere are dealing with the loss of habitat as more and more development pops up around the country. Even in southern Delaware, where there's more farms and more open space, the bees suffer because of what's called monoculture, where there's one crop that's spread out and is their only source of food. So the best thing for bees is a diverse source of plants that they can go and find some food. Okay,
well, in your story you did not appear afraid because you were pretty close, but any stings?
No, we didn't get any stings, and I was a little nervous about going in that close, and we were very close, but the bees were very focused on doing their job and getting in and out of the hive, and as long as you didn't get in the way of that, you were okay. Plus they used the smoke to interrupt their chemical signals, so that helped a lot. No stings.
Okay, well, thanks, Mark. You can learn more about Delaware beekeepers on our website, newsworks.org/Delaware.
Coming up, the story of a child who eats crayons also becomes a story of self-expression. And in First Experience, a couple of classically trained artists show off new ways to view life around them.
With $37 million in budget cuts for public schools looming next year, protesters gathered on the steps of Legislative Hall in Dover this week to urge an alternative, an increase in income taxes that will be enough to avert the loss of teaching jobs and school programs.
We ought to be asking that there be no cuts to education. I'm actually crazy enough to believe that we ought to be asking them to increase funding to education.
You can't tell me that we're going to be a better Delaware, a better, stronger Delaware in the future if you're slashing education funding.
Carney's cuts aren't etched in stone, though. Beyond the protesters' call for higher income taxes, lawmakers are looking for ways to restore some of the money. But one idea is fraught with controversy: having school boards raise taxes without letting voters decide in a referendum. With us today is Kenny Rivera, a teacher who serves on the board of the Red Clay District. Welcome to First.
Great, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, well, the big question is whether school boards should be the ones who raise property taxes rather than the residents themselves. Why is this a risky endeavor?
Well, right now voters have a say, and they feel like it provides accountability on school districts on the fiscal management. And by taking that away from the voters, many voters are going to be scared that districts may overspend and raise their taxes too high.
Have voters talked to you about this and expressed their, displeasure at maybe having to do this?
Very few, but it has been a conversation in the past several years. There's been several commissions, most recently the Wilmington Education Commission, who's come out and talked about the broken system, the funding system in Delaware, and the need for reform. And there are many reform ideas out there being discussed, such as giving school boards the power to tax.
All right, well, let's talk about the two proposals that are out there that would take residents out of the equation. The first is a match tax that Governor Carney's proposed, and that would let districts recoup up to $22 million of the $37 million he wants to cut. What are your thoughts about that? I think for Red Clay would be $4 million, and that would save a lot of teaching jobs and programs.
I think the intentions are good. The state's given local boards the opportunity to keep very much needed positions to educate our children. On the flip side, without major referendum reform, it is also a dangerous vote for school boards to make, because the public could hold the district accountable in future referendums if they don't like the idea of school districts voting for that match tax.
Right, especially if you come back the next year and you want to raise taxes 8%, and they say, wait, you know, you took us
Exactly
out
right,
of it.
because the match tax is actually a very small amount comparatively of a school district's budget, and they would still need to go to referendum every 3 to 5 years, depending where they are in the cycle right now. And that's the larger referendum, and they can't risk losing that one for sure.
Now, the other proposal out there would tie property tax increases to the consumer price index, and it would let school districts raise the rates every 2 years. Now, the index was 2.1% last year. So our residents, you think they're willing to let school boards raise their taxes 4% every 2 years automatically?
We are one of the only states in the United States that does not give school boards this power to do so. And the bill puts a severe limit on how much the school boards can raise. Right now, the revenues coming into any school district is stagnant. From now until eternity, it's going to be the exact same amount, unless a school board goes to its voters and asks for a referendum, a tax increase. Because more students continue to be enrolled, costs go up for just inflation, so there has to be some way for school districts to be able to continue to bring in more revenue as costs go up.
Now, one thing, you know, the state spends about 2/3 of they pay for about 2/3 of the schools.
Correct.
And Carney has said, you know, school districts have wanted to do this. Maybe it's time they shoulder their burden. You know, briefly summarize what you think about that idea.
I think school districts are interested in talking about it, but the fear is that the state will then say, if you have the power to tax, they will begin to cut back on their current level of funding and say, well, you just tax your residents through property tax. That's very dangerous. This bill actually puts in a protection that the state cannot cut their state share, and we can only raise taxes at a school board level at a very limited amount every 2 years, which is actually helpful for a property owner like myself, who right now we have referendums every 3 to 5 years, and you have this huge spike in your personal budget every 3 to 5 years. Here, it's going to be a small level growth every couple of years if it needs it at that time.
Well, we could talk about this forever, but thanks for joining us. Kenny Rivera is on the Red Clay School Board. See WHYY's education coverage at newsworks.org/Delaware.
The flip side to all this talk about school funding can be found at Servium Girls Academy. It's tuition-free for low-income families. The academy partnered this school year with award-winning storyteller Berdinka. Turns out both students and teacher taught each other something valuable. Seventh graders at Wilmington's Servium Academy gather around in a circle to read their stories out loud.
Alrighty. Are we missing anybody today? Is anybody missing today?
One by one, the students present their narratives as their classmates listen with glee and sometimes awe.
When I was at least like 4 to 7, I ate crayons, so the only brand I ate was Crayola. I wouldn't eat any other brand.
At first, a story like this may not seem very interesting, but when told well, it'll have your audience laughing in their seats.
A job of a story is not to express yourself. The job of a story is to express yourself in a way that someone else will relate to what you're trying to say.
I ran all across the mall, scared that I wasn't going to see my family ever again. I kept on thinking to myself, where would I live if I didn't have my mom, my dad, or my sister? I thought I would be lost forever and I would never see my whole family ever again.
After weeks of working with Berdinka, a winner of the Moth Storytelling Contest, the girls soon learned the art of storytelling is a skill that needs to be constantly perfected.
This is the way people write, by the way. No one writes in any book that you've ever read or any story they've ever told. No one just writes that out and sends it into a publisher. They all go over it 100,000 times to get every single line to mean something. And I'm hoping you guys are seeing that the work that you're putting into it is really making these stories better.
Berdinka would know. He spent several years helping writers at Miramax craft their work. Miramax produces and distributes films and shows for television.
My job was to help them find scripts and work with those writers and directors to fine-tune and hone those scripts into what they needed to be the movies that went on screen. So my job was basically like a script doctor.
The script doctor worked with the students for weeks, reinforcing the building blocks of a good story. English teacher Blair Borish is excited about how her students have grown as public speakers.
One of the things in educational research now is, literacy, reading and writing is super important, but there's this new idea coming out about oracy, which is the ability to express yourself orally and to tell a story or to, express an opinion in a very fluent manner.
A lack of confidence is often a roadblock that sometimes silences students because they think no one cares about what they have to say. But these budding writers have lots to say. Berdinka says they just need to believe in themselves.
Listening to these girl stories and listening to what they had to say, they are natural-born storytellers. They are really good at this. And so, my job isn't to tell them how to tell their stories, but to kind of get out of the way and let them see that they're naturally good at it.
Maybe we should do this again next year. What about the year after that? Then the next year after that. And we was like, okay.
I'm not sure I can ever look at a box of crayons the same way again. Now, with that in mind, Berdinka used to believe that people had a limited amount of stories. However, the girls proved that theory wrong. The kids loved sharing their stories in the framework Berdinka set up. She found interesting stories worth sharing from an amazing group.
Earlier this week, Governor Carney announced an agreement to boost the take-home pay for correctional officers by 22% over 2 years. It was one of the recommendations in the state report on the prison riot at the Vaughn Correctional Center in February. We'll discuss this and many more topics as we can squeeze in here on State of Play. And here with us again is Steve Tanzer of DelawareLiberal.net. Steve, thanks for being here again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So it is worth bringing this up because I'm sure a pay raise for correctional officers was not on John Carney's mind in January when he took office. But I guess it had to be done, or did it?
Oh, it had to be done. It should have been done a long time ago. I mean, we had a similar report back in 2005 that highlighted this. And here we are with of course, the event being the Vaughn Correctional Center tragedy, underlining exactly what all of the problems there are. I mean, we've had an extremely hard time both recruiting and retaining correctional officers, not to mention that we're making them work ridiculous hours under less than optimal conditions. Sure. The problems, of course, also are felt by the inmates who are living there as well. It's just a horrible situation. The report is a very good report, actually, and it really recommends quite a few things. This had to be done, and it's really just the first step. They're talking about a career ladder, right, and they're talking about other opportunities. We were losing correctional officers to New Jersey after a couple of years, not because they had a real career ladder and you could move up very quickly there. Whereas in Delaware, it's been going on like this for some time. As I might add, it's been going on with state employees for some time.
And so is the state spending some more money to pay correctional officers, and state lawmakers getting a little bit more money in revenue estimates from DFAC this week. Revenues up. The deficit comes in at only $350 million now. So obviously good news, not as good as news as they might have hoped, but how does this affect the budget debate going through the next couple weeks?
What it'll do is it'll make the cuts less draconian. You've got $27 million in newly identified revenue from the DFAC committee. That's the committee that basically estimates what the available revenues are going to be. You also have a package of bills that really is beginning to move now. That includes, of course, the increase in the brackets, that includes the increase in the deduction, but taking away the itemized deductions. You've got beer tax, or actually an alcohol tax, cigarette tax, vape tax, and even a possible tax on LLCs as well. You also have a bill from Representative Kowalko that would add not one, but two new top brackets, one at $125,000 and one at $250,000, which may or may not get to the floor. So you can see on the revenue side that you're pretty close to getting a deal made.
And then how about the cut side? That seems to be where there's been a lot of. We saw a protest earlier this week for education officials upset about cuts to the Department of Education and schools.
Correct, especially the schools. I mean, you could probably make cuts to the Department of Education, which essentially did away with some administrative positions, but it's the schools, and the schools have constantly been having to deal on the cheap the last few years, which of course then makes referendum more essential and makes passing them even more challenging. So you're right. I mean, the teachers in particular saying, why are we always the redheaded stepchild? And I agree with them. So what I would think would happen, would hope would happen, is that with that $27 million, you can begin to ease the education cuts, at least.
Right. Okay, so some other items not connected to the budget necessarily. We saw the first step in the Coastal Zone Act, changing some things around there to allow changes at the historically grandfathered in sites along the coastal zone to allow different uses for industry. Fairly easy passage in the House.
Fairly easy, and in fact, the bill was amended to make the bill, I think, more palatable. Specifically, we talk about the bulk transfers being a really controversial topic. One of the amendments limits that bulk transfer. You can't have what essentially you call pass-through bulk transfers. It has to be something that you're actually producing there that would be part of the bulk transfer. Wouldn't be like a pass-through, like from something to something else. You also require, you put reporting requirements in, which were not in the initial bill. And so, and you also require the companies that would go in to agree to do the remedial environmental cleanup and to keep it in good shape. So it's not unlike what we call a brownfields bill, really. So I still think what they should do is have public hearings during the break, but I think they're going to push this through. But it is not the carte blanche that I think the chamber wanted in the first place.
So then, as we come up to the end of the session, rapidly approaching, obviously the budget a priority. Do you think this is the historic year where things are not settled by the early hours of July 1st, and we go a couple more days, or do you think now that with the added DFAC money, it gets done sort of as usual?
I think it'll probably get done as usual. What you really have now are the Republicans essentially holding the budget hostage for certain things that they want. Bill was introduced this week that basically has a 3-year moratorium on prevailing wage for DelDOT construction projects. That's one of the prices they're trying to exact. I don't know whether they will or not. But practically speaking, when you're close enough to make the deal, the will of the legislators to come in for a couple more days, that evaporates really quickly.
All right, and we imagine that Steve Tanzer will stay up late on June 30th just to see how it all pans out, and you don't miss a minute. You can read his work on DelawareLiberal.net. Thanks, Steve.
My pleasure. Thank you.
First experience now. For more than 35 years, Eve and Martin Stone worked as graphic artists for DuPont. Both Eve and Martin are classically trained artists, and after retirement, they continue to do what they love, painting. We visited their home studios to see their lifelong love of art. It's a love that's still going strong.
I'm Eve Stone, and this is my husband, Marvin. We met in art school. Marvin's first job was DuPont Company. We decided to come here and have a mom and pop little graphic design studio doing advertising art, commercial art for DuPont.
They just told me to take everything I was working on and just go across the street and finish it. So we started off with 6 months' work.
That was a lot of fun. In art school, we tried everything. So I decided I like oils. They're very permanent. And you know what, you cover mistakes. You can do 10 layers. If you don't like what you have, just cover it up.
Eve calls me the fastest pen in the West. All my life I have been sketching. I'm drawn to nature and buildings, architecture, and the wonderful thing about watercolor, if you let the colors just come together on the paper, all sorts of surprises, and it's just wonderful thing happens with watercolor. I love watercolor. I wouldn't even go near anything else.
It's a labor of love. There's something very exciting about creating something new, and really you surprise yourself. You know, all the years we did commercial art, we sold art. We made a living out of selling these little advertising pieces. And we decided just to do something we love for the rest of the time that we're here. You know, you never stop learning. You can always find something new. There's something about creativity. When you're starting to paint, you lose track of time. I thought it was 8 minutes. Where's dinner? It's been 4 hours.
Well, that's me. I come up there. She's locked in her studio, and I'm hungry. And
that's a wonderful moment. Art is communication. You're going to show people who you are. You want to sign it. You want to be proud of it. It's wonderful. It enriches my life so, because I see things more and more acutely each year. Colors, seasons, clouds. And my mind is thinking colors, my mind is thinking compositions at all times. I'm always thinking what's dark, what's medium, what's light, what are the shapes. I think there's a joy, there's a wonder at everything that you see, everywhere you go.
I don't know any other way for me to live, and having been able to earn your living at it, what more could you want?
Yeah, it has been a very rewarding, interesting, exciting life, and continues to be.
Both Eve and Marvin love to give back. They both teach at the University of Delaware's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Eve teaches oil painting and Marvin teaches watercolor painting. You can get more information on classes when you visit them on the web at lifelonglearning.udel.edu.
And next week on First, Wilmington's police chief has been on the job for a couple of months. What's his plan to make Wilmington streets safer? And we report on the state of the school library. Its function is changing, but how? We'll tell you next week.
A quick reminder that our program, Courageous Conversation Race, Removing Fences Between Black and White Communities, airs July 2nd at 3:30 on WHYY-TV.
Tonight, we have some panelists who are going to be addressing all of those issues and more as we consider race and how the fences seem to serve as division points between black and white communities.
We invite you to continue the conversation by watching Sunday, July 2nd at 3:30 on WHYY-TV. That is First for this week. We thank you for watching. For Shirley Min and Nichelle Polston and Chris Barish, I'm Mark Eichman. Have a great week.
Thank you.